Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Alfred Hitchcock Presents review. Today it is Season 1, Episode 2, Premonition, starring John Forsythe as Kim Stanger, Cloris Leachman as Susan Stanger, and Warren Stevens as Perry Stanger. And this is a very solid episode. I don't think it's quite as good as the first episode, but it's still a very good episode that I feel is very much worth watching. I just have a few issues towards the end of the episode, which I will get into when I get there. So we start with our main character, Kim, and he's narrating the story, and I really like that touch. I thought it added to the episode as we get a lot of the character's thoughts throughout it, and we find out he's been away for a little bit over 4 years, I believe it is, from this town, and he says when he returned, things are pretty much the same as he remembers them. He's just kind of reminiscing, which is fine, and he meets a man named Doug Irwin, and they chat for a while, and he says he's been homesick and that he wants to see his father, and he doesn't understand why his father doesn't return any of his letters, things like that. We're not really sure how well they get along, and Doug discourages Kim. He says maybe it's not such a good idea that you came home without anybody knowing about it. So right away that seems a little bit suspicious. So we go to the next scene, and Kim feels that something's wrong. That's the reason he came back into town. And he goes home and he sees a picture of his father there, and he just reminisces and he talks about the man some. And he examines a gun that his father owned as well, which will be important to the story later on. And he observes later on that there was rust on it and that his father never would have let this happen. So we go to the next scene, and he's playing piano, and a woman named Susan comes in, and we find out that it's his sister-in-law, and she seems concerned that he's there, more than happy to see him. She doesn't seem to be all that thrilled that he's there, and they talk for a little while, and then a man named Perry comes in, who we find out is Kim's brother, and eventually one thing leads to another, and we learn that Kim's father passed away, and Susan and Perry basically say they didn't tell him because they thought he might blame himself. They thought he might feel responsible for it because apparently him and his father weren't on the best of terms. But something about this whole thing already doesn't add up. It sounds kind of like a made-up story, which we'll find out later it is. And Kim naturally suspects foul play, and I have to say the whole rest of this episode does a pretty good job at trying to mislead us into thinking that Perry or someone else may have killed the father, but it's a little bit too obvious of a mislead, and I thought it was pretty obvious where this episode was going, which is my slight complaint towards it, but I'll get into more of that in a bit here. So Susan goes to talk to Kim, who then goes up to another room in the house. I think it's his old room, and he's upset, and he apologizes for the way he acted, and she basically doesn't seem too upset about it. And Kim's thinking about his father some more. He goes into another room, which looked maybe like his father's study. I'm not really sure. And while he's narrating to us, he basically finds some evidence that contradicts the dates in question, and they don't back up Perry's story at all. So now we're really suspicious of this guy Perry, and so is Kim. So Kim goes to visit Doug, the man we met earlier in the episode, and Doug confirms this cause of death. He's a doctor, I believe. He says, yeah, what Perry's saying is true, but Kim's just not buying it no matter what. But Doug sticks to his story, and he tells Kim you should forget about it. But, of course, Kim doesn't, and he goes to visit this man that works at the cemetery. I think he's in charge of it, and he wants to see his father's grave, and when the man doesn't cooperate, he basically chokes this guy. So we can see that Kim can be pretty violent here, which will be important later on. And Perry comes in, his brother, and he once again tells him to forget it, but Kim's just not having any of it. Again, they're making us believe that Perry is somehow involved in what happened here. Then Kim goes to visit a coroner, I believe, and he threatens this guy as well until he can find out more information. So this guy's definitely got a little bit of a temper, a violent streak, whatever you want to call it. And once again, it's a mislead to just think it's Perry, I think, at this point. It's pretty obvious to all of us what's going on. So Kim goes to the old lodge where his father was to find out more about what's going on. And Susan comes, and she's begging him not to pry, but we can tell at this point Kim needs to know what's happening. And she basically tells him that he's been in a hospital the last 4 years, and he made up all these other things about being in Paris and Rome and working on his music and all this stuff, and that her and Perry and basically all these other people were in on it, and they all arranged to protect Kim because twist revealed he's the one that killed his father. And you might be thinking that this whole thing sounds a bit far-fetched, and I agree. The whole thing that all these people conspired just to protect this guy. But if you just go with it, the episode works. I will say I think they misled towards Perry a little bit too much. It became almost like they misled it so much where you were pretty sure that Kim was in some way behind this. And the whole thing just feels a little bit too convenient at times. But it's a solid episode. And to be fair, again, remembering when this was made, might have been viewed a little bit differently in the mid-50s. It holds up pretty well. It's a solid, entertaining episode for the most part. And I give Premonition a 3.5 out of 5. Definitely a solid episode, and if you're a fan of these type of mystery stories, I think you'll enjoy it. So 3.5 out of 5 for Premonition, and as always, thanks for watching.